I am free, I am free. I am the flame of liberty. Say this together with me. I am free, I am free. I am the flame of liberty. I am free, I am free. I am the flame of liberty. You see this torch I have in my hand about 8 years ago. I gave a presentation at a prayer vigil on the 4th of July on the history of the Statue of Liberty and how she was brought as the focus of the Goddess of Liberty to the United States as a gift from the people of France. And as you know, the Revolutionary War would never have been won without the allies of the people of France. So in 1886 was the 100th anniversary of when we actually brought the statue to America, and it was a lot of work, a lot of fundraising that had to be done. And today we see on the streets of our cities and our nation, America, many of these focuses, statues, some of ascended masters, our beloved Godfrey, George Washington, our beloved Saint Germain as Christopher Columbus, even our beloved Lord Jesus Christ and Mother Mary, taken down and thrown to the streets in desecration and lawlessness. Today I'd like to talk about liberty. I'd like to talk about what it is, what it means to every man, woman, and child, no matter their race, their color, their creed, or their doctrine. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Goddess of Liberty before we go on to her teaching today from volume 11, number 26, from 1968. The Goddess of Liberty is a spokesman for the Karmic Board and representative of the second ray on that board. She's the hierarch of the Temple of the Sun in her etheric retreat over the island of Manhattan, New York. The Goddess of Liberty was embodied on Atlantis, and she was embodied as a member of the Amazonian race, a people of great stature, like her statue, whose women ruled an ancient civilization where the Amazon basin now is. So great was her momentum of dedication to the spirit of liberty embodied in the threefold flame of the heart that after her ascension, this Lady Master was called upon to bear the title of Goddess of Liberty, denoting her office and hierarchy as the authority for the cosmic consciousness of liberty to the earth. During her embodiment upon Atlantis, she erected the Temple of the Sun, where Manhattan Island now is, and patterning it after the solar temple in the great central sun. The central altar was dedicated to the threefold flame of the liberty of the Christ, which proceeds from the white fire core of being, focused by beloved Alpha and Omega. This shrine was surrounded by 12 lesser shrines, attended by representatives of the solar hierarchies, who together with the Goddess of Liberty, invoked on behalf of the evolutions of the earth, the spiritual radiation of the sun behind the sun. Just prior to the sinking of Atlantis, the Goddess of Liberty transported the Liberty flame enshrined at the temple to a place of safety in another retreat of the Great White Brotherhood, the Château de Liberté in southern France, which is the retreat of our beloved Paul the Venetian, and his spiritual mother is the Goddess of Liberty. When Atlantis went down in cataclysm, the Temple of the Sun was withdrawn to the etheric octave, and the activities of the Brotherhood of Liberty continue at the etheric plane where the physical temple once stood. So today I would like to tell you a little bit about some symbols, some focuses of liberty, a little bit of history. It seems now that we see a move or a push or a cry toward erasing our history, our very history. All of us have a history. All of us have been here, and those of us who here, of course, believe in the re-embodiment doctrine. So we know that we've been here in many shapes and forms. We know that whatever we have done in past lives, we must pay for or receive in goodness for every jot and tittle of the law. So let us know our history. It saddens me to see many of our young people on the streets. And most of the people who are on the streets may have some justification, and there is regret. There is the First Amendment right to protest peaceably. But when we start taking property down and defacing things and other people's property, then we have infringed on their property. And we know that during the Revolutionary War, we were not yet the United States of America. We were under the rule of the British Empire. There was a British state, so to speak. And I'd like to talk about today the Liberty Bell, a little history on the Liberty Bell. And I really would recommend taking out some books, some good books on history, and reading about the history of the United States, about the individuals. And don't take things that you hear on television or people's opinions, but read the history. I thought of this title, I am free, I am free, I am the flame of liberty, because I realized that people really knew their history in God, their history from the great central sun, the one source of all men and women and children. They would know the truth. I'd like to tell you about the Liberty Bell's beginnings in 1751. It started there before 1776, and it started in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia was a beautiful, flourishing, diverse town led by the Society of Friends, or the Quakers. It became the largest urban center in North America. It was a sign of prosperity as a new state house, which is now Independence Hall, if you've ever been to Philadelphia. I just happened to grow up in western southern New Jersey, about 30 miles east of Philadelphia. So I was able to go there several times in my life. At that time, Independence Hall, or the New State House as it was called, was the largest building in North America. It was still unfinished after 20 years in construction. And they had a new steeple and a tower, but it was empty and it had no bell. The superintendent of the construction was a man by the name of Isaac Norris II. He lived from 1701 to 1766. He was a powerful man at the time, and he wanted to do something about the empty tower. And by the way, he was a Quaker. Isaac II and his father Isaac I were rich Quaker merchants who expanded just 100 pounds of capital into the largest fortunes in America. The politics, they served in politics in the Pennsylvania Assembly, and both were elected speaker. The son was the leader of the anti-proprietary Quaker Party, or the Norris Party, and they were in battle because the Quakers were a little bit different than the other faiths that came to the to the new land, the Calvinists, the Roman Catholics, the Anglicans. The faithful members of the Society of Friends were both Isaac and his father. And the Quakers were known for their spiritual values. They were still very important in spite of their wealth and their power that they acquired. They had belief in plain, frugal, humble, clean living, founding principles, the close students of the Bible, and they used it as their practical guide for daily decisions. What so happened in 1751, Isaac decided to proclaim that he would have a bell, a proposal of ordering a bell for the 50th anniversary of an event which his father was pivotal in, and that was in 1701. And there was a crisis in the affairs of Pennsylvania. They thought their colony was going to become a royal colony. So Senior Norris wrote of his concern that the colony might be without laws or liberties. So as a precaution, Elder Norris helped persuade William Penn, who was the founder of Pennsylvania, to issue a charter of privileges that guaranteed the rights of the people. So Junior Norris took over the Quaker Party Assembly, and he was dedicated to the cause of liberty and the rights derived to us by our charter and the laws. Junior Norris then in 1751 convinced the Pennsylvania Assembly to commission a great bell as an enduring symbol of that freedom. And on that bell was to be the words from the Bible, from Leviticus 25, verse 10, part of that which was proclaim liberty through all the land to all the inhabitants thereof. And it would be ordered from England, because there was no foundry in the United States at that time to produce such a large bell, and the bell was to be about a ton in weight. The Assembly liked the ideas, of course, and they were all 75% of them were Quakers, and the Quaker project symbolized their values and their purposes. It was a Quaker vision of liberty. It was different, as I said, than from the beliefs of New England and New York. The Quakers began their thought of liberty and their thought of liberty as God, gift from God. And other Christians believed that also. But the Quakers understood it in a special way. They thought of it as an inner light that was given to all his children. Excuse me, one moment. The Quakers understood liberty as a special inner light that was given to all members of God's children, not merely the elect, as the Calvinists imagined, or the members of an established church, the Anglicans and the Roman Catholics. The Quakers believed the inner light dwelled within all of God's creatures, and sometimes they spoke of the light of liberty. Excuse me, one more time. Further, the Quakers believed that God had given this gift for a purpose, so people might live in peace and not oppress one another, and do works of goodness and mercy in the world. The Quakers' principle embraced everyone and bound them to the principle of the Golden Rule, which they, the Quakers, regarded as central guide in conducting their daily affairs. It held the promise of equality in the special sense of an even-handed reciprocity of rights and Christian obligations. The bell was a perfect image of the Quaker idea that everyone could hear and it was a metaphor that everyone could hear for the dream of liberty and freedom that rang throughout the land. The Quakers also were very practical minded, and they saw the bell as a promise of function and utility, as they did not approve of needless things. Philadelphia had grown so large in the mid-18th century, they had need for the larger bell. So, the making of the bell, and this is the story, why I'm telling you this story, is because the making of the bell shows the struggle, the initiation of liberty, of the Christ initiation in all of us, and what it took to form this United States of America. So they took this bell and sent it off to be made in England at the Whitechapel Bell Foundry in London, which also had cast Big Ben. It cost about 100 pounds to a little over a ton in weight, and it was a moderately big bell for British standards. It was shipped promptly from London, but it was damaged in transit, and before it was properly secured in Philadelphia, an attempt was made to ring it, and to the horrors of the workmen, the bell broke. It was cracked by a stroke of the clapper while hung up to try the sound, said Isaac Norris II. He wanted to return it to England, but by the same ship that transported America, but they wouldn't take it. The Quakers were desperate. They gave it to a pair of ingenious workmen in Philadelphia, John Pass and Charles Stowe. And these men were asked to recast the bell, which they had never done before. They hammered it into pieces, and they melted the metal, and they remolded it, and it was quickly done. The original Quaker inscription from the Bible was even better than the original, but it said now 1753, cast in British America. However, the workmen had tested several smaller bells, and they changed the original bell metal by adding 1.5 ounces of copper to every 1 pound of metal. The result was it had a ruined sound, and they found and rendered that bell useless. Isaac Norris said workers were much teased with witticisms of the town. They were unfettered. The broke bell, and they changed the mix again, and they melted it down and recast, and the result was better. It had a distinguished tone, not like they originally thought. It was a deep, heavy, almost a growling sound. But he said, Isaac Norris said, I do not like it. But others far and wide appreciated and favored the gravitas of the great bell. It rang as if it meant something, said the Philadelphians. So in 1753, it was installed in the Pennsylvania State House. The replacement came from London, no better than the one they had made. The Pennsylvania Assembly announced each session. That's how it was used. And when they rang the bell, no one was to appear, everyone must appear within 1/2 hour, or they were fined a shilling for every such delinquency. And money was given to the Pennsylvania Hospital, another meaning of self-government. So the bell was used for many purposes. And in 1765, during the Stamp Act, the bell was rung, but it was muffled and tolled with solemnity, like the funeral of American rights. On October 3rd, 1765, the Stamp Act took effect, and the public meeting mourned the death of liberty. In 1767 to 68, They summoned the freemen of the city to meetings against the Townshend duties. In 1770, the non-importation agreements, the bell rang. And by 1772, there were even complaints of the bell ringing too much from those living close by, and some felt it extremely dangerous and may prove fatal. In 1950, we'll tell you that as part of a private donor, we recast 55 replicas of the Liberty Bell and sent them to all of the states in the United States. They were cast by the Packard Foundry in France. 55 full-size replicas of the Liberty Bell. Over the years, we've had dissenters and radicals that made the Liberty Bell site a favorite place for demonstrations. In 1976, an idol smasher attacked it with an exhaust pipe. In 2001, a self-styled Midwest wanderer tried to smash it with a 5-pound sledgehammer, shouting, "God lives." And from then on, it's been surrounded by heavily armed guards. I will tell you that the bell was also last rung in 1835 or so, which is when it finally had the crack from the lip to the top of the bell. And they decided to cast a new one, and the original one is on display in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. In the 1840s, with its Quaker inscription, this Liberty Bell became a link to the American Revolution, and its idea of universal rights were especially meaningful to the anti-slavery movement. The 1840s is when the abolitionists began to call it the Liberty Bell and claimed it for their cause. The great bell was preserved the original meaning as an emblem of the generous Quaker idea of reciprocal liberty. So what does the Goddess of Liberty say in this June 30th, 1968, volume 11, number 26 dictation? She says, "Beloved children of the flame of liberty, the thrust of man's desire for liberty has its origin in the very sun center of the universe. Man was conceived in the expansive flame of liberty from God's own heart. This reality, dimmed now by intruding factors, remains the goal of the wise and the sincere. The billions who call the planet Earth home are broken fragments of a universal oneness. The liberty of oneness has been lost to the multifaceted sense of separation, and thus, beneath his own fig tree and attached to his own vine, man goes his separate and several ways." So that brought us to the flame of brotherhood, and to the flame and the path of brotherhood, which is what we follow. The entire spirit of the great white brotherhood, the white light, denoting the white light of the aura, and the color white is all of the colors of the rainbow into the prism of light. I like to read this next paragraph and then read from a book, The Path of Brotherhood, from the Climb the Highest Mountain series by Mark and Elizabeth Prophet, where we're talking about what this flame of liberty is and what it means in today's world. "No specific good would occur," says the Goddess of Liberty, "in the community of being by forcing the separated segments of the universal into an unwilling alliance. For there the liberty of oneness would be ignored, and the pull of the senses, like snorting wild steeds, would create its tides of restless energy to pull man away from the balance of true being. Only the pull of the sun center of universal reality, only the recognition by mankind en masse of the great laws governing cosmos and the spread of understanding about cosmos can develop within the unfolding identity of the individual, a sense of the harmony of universal liberty. The masters of wisdom, says the goddess of liberty, in their great outreach in every age and the beginning of this century, have not neglected to inform mankind about the reality of the brotherhood, the cloak of religion which has smothered, rather than swaddled mankind's beginnings in truth, has masked the face of creative expansion, set brother against brother, absorbed mankind's energies in fruitless struggle, and weakened the plan of the brotherhood for the unity of this age. And so it brings us to today, and what situations we have on the planet, and what evil has lurked upon the sprouts of light. And we see the influence of something else on the streets of our cities this day. For those who have fought and died for this liberty flame, we see those who know not their history, who know not the understanding of God, and perhaps have no feeling of God. And therein lies the situation that we are in. So on page 96 of The Path of Brotherhood, from the Climb the Highest Mountain series, and this chapter is entitled World Communism, Counterfeit of the Golden Age Culture. It talks about initiative. It says, we find then that the nation America was selected by the Great White Brotherhood to be the place where the example of brotherhood would be set forth through the example of individuals fulfilling their Christhood, through their own self-initiation. It says initiative is initiation. The American people take their initiations in the Great White Brotherhood by their own initiative. For the fullest development of that initiative, Saint Germain planned a limited government with the greatest freedom for the individual and the individual states, and the least control by the federal government. He planned a free enterprise system with the least interference by federal or local government, so that the mastery of time and space and the proving of individual self-worth would be on the shoulders of the individual. As long as this plan of Saint Germain was sustained, there was a platform for initiation, a platform to become the Christ. However, it says, this plan has been altered during this last century. We find a tremendous turning of the tide to reverse what Saint Germain set forth. We no longer find a free enterprise system as it was intended to be, but instead more and more government and a maximum of government controls and a minimum of initiative required on the part of the individual. This has limited the path of initiation, has limited the opportunity for the individual to become the Christ and to be accepted as a link in the chain of hierarchy and as a member of the Great White Brotherhood. We find that today it is more difficult to become the Christ than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and certainly much more difficult than it was when the first settlers came and had to forge a life out of the wilderness. Think of that. The more life of ease and luxury that we may have, the more difficult it is to have the opportunity to pass our initiations. So it says the more rugged the life, the more challenging the environment, the less anyone does for you, the more you are calculated to become the master of your life. We find now, says the book here, the government takes from the people what is required for the intelligent development of the Christ consciousness. Now we have people that may be listening here that have grown up in communist countries. Many of our ancestors have grown up or been in communist countries and came to America. Or indeed, we've had slavery in America. We have had many things in our history. We have situations where we have the violet flame to take those situations. What would we need the violet flame for, if not for history of every jot and tittle of the law? But the interesting thing that we see today, compared to what happened in the Revolutionary War times, where they did not yet have a United States of America, they did not yet have the Declaration of Independence. They had a war. They had the Revolutionary War. It was going on. And it went on after the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution was not written until after they had formed a government. And these things had an order to them. But now we still have the rights to march in the streets, our First Amendment rights. But we do not have the same struggles in most cases that they had when they were forming this nation. Many more things they had to overcome. So thus it says, when people work a labor and a sacred labor of their hands, they do not have returned to them the wealth that they have contributed to the nation. What does this produce? Well, it produces lethargy, sloth, indifference, and no longer a pulling together of a nation. And it completely destroys the development of that Christ potential. I heard a man speaking the other day on a video I was listening to. And he's a writer of history, and he was talking about what's happening today, and it really hit me as to the choices that we have today as to where our country goes, as if we have a Y in the road. And do we truly understand where each direction goes? And what he was saying was that in regard to statues being taken down and people generally destroying, destructivity, and what were they replacing these things with? They were more apt to destroy and have nothing to replace it with, to lead a void with violence. And he was saying that personal agendas piggybacked on in a parasitical fashion. As they glom onto the revolution, they think it's going to carry them in their careers to new trajectories. Speaking of those who do these things or support these things, he says, we're looking for one brave man or woman to say it's not going to happen anymore. You're not coming to my neighborhood. You're not going to like what's going to happen if you come here and you destroy things. He mentioned that it's not political. It's not right or left. It's not lockdowns or virus, economy or foreign policy. It's an existential question that we have to ask between what we want and do we want civilization? What is civilization? Sometimes when you're walking in the woods and you get lost and you're looking for some kind of sign of a house or smoke coming from a chimney, you're looking for civilization, of people living there. Civilization is also the opposite of barbarism and chaos. Civilization is an advanced stage of human society where people live with a reasonable degree of organization and comfort and can think about things like art and education. This man also went on to say, do you believe America doesn't have to be perfect to be good? Do we have to be perfect to be good? And in this third century of this grand experiment called America, we are a young toddler nation compared to the rest of the world. Do we think we have to destroy everything for all those people who died for this nation and what it is? Are you, or do you feel, he says, is inherently flawed with a cancer that we have to use radiation and chemotherapy to kill the host and kill the cancer? He said, let us side on that of civilization. And let us think of the path of civilization and the bond of brotherhood and understanding fair. I came across a man also by the name of Frederic Bastiat. He wrote an essay called The Law. He was French. In 1850, he wrote this essay called The Law. That's Frederic Bastiat, B-A-S-T-I-A-T. It was very interesting. I'd never really read his work. And Frederic Bastiat was a French economist, a writer, a prominent member of the French Libertarian Party, and a Freemason. And some of the things he wrote sound like they were written yesterday. You have to remember when he wrote these things, this essay on law, it was 2 years after the Communist Manifesto of Karl Marx from 1848, and after the Third Revolution in France. We all know how that kind of turned out. Here are some of the words and sayings of Frederic Bastiat. He talks about socialism. He says, socialism, like the ancient ideas from which it springs, confuses the distinction between government and society. As a result of this, every time we object to a thing being done by government, the socialists conclude that we object to it being done at all. We disapprove of state education, and the socialists say that we are opposed to any education. We object to a state religion, and then the socialists say that we want no religion at all. We object to a state-enforced equality, and then they say we are against equality, and so on, as if the socialists were to accuse us of not wanting persons to eat because we do not want the state to raise grain. It brings up something to me in this Statue of Liberty, the Goddess of Liberty, the many immigrants that came across the Newark Ellis Island and saw the Statue of Liberty, including, I'm just going to tell you a little personal story of my own grandparents. It made me think of this. My grandmother, my paternal grandmother and grandfather came to the United States in 1904, 1905. They came separately. They didn't know each other. They came from a place called Galicia, which was the part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they were Ruthenian Ukrainians. And they were pretty much peasants, laborers. They neither spoke English nor could read and write in their own language. They came to the United States and moved to Western Pennsylvania, to the coal mine area. My grandmother worked cleaning houses for $5 a month, I was told by my father. And the Ukrainians and the Ukraine area were taken over by the Soviet Union and the Communist Party because the Ukrainians were a fierce bunch and wanted to keep their autonomy. And so I often wondered if my grandparents had stayed in that part of the world, which is now Poland, they probably would have been cast out, and goodness knows what would have happened. So we're all here by the grace of God and by this great liberty flame. We will also talk about what happened in 1932 and 1933 in the country of Ukraine. The Soviet Union was very much wanting to take over everything, and they established communes, collectives, where you did not have your own individual farm. Everything was grown and put into the common good. Well, the kulaks, the K-U-L-A-K, were the ones who furiously held on to their properties and wanted to have their own properties, but the The Soviets and the Russian party did not want to have them keep their liberties, and they were determined to keep them from these liberties that they enjoyed and they fought for. And so basically, unknowns to most of our history and the history that I learned in school, but my father told me about it, but I never saw it written anywhere, was that in 1932 and 1933, there was basically a hunger, an enforced starvation of the Ukrainian people. And they estimate 7 to 10 million people died at that time. It was unreported. Most people didn't know we were in the middle of a depression in the United States. I know that some reporters were there and went to try to report about it. Many of them were stopped. Many of them were paid off, not to tell the truth. And they called it now the Holodomor. And they remember the lives that were lost. It was so wretched a time that even if you kept a grain of your own crop for your family to eat, you could be put to death. They resorted even to cannibalism. It was a most horrible time. This is the loss of liberty. This is an extreme situation. We look at the United States and we wonder, we can't believe what we're seeing. We can't believe some of our liberties that are taken away. We don't understand it. It doesn't seem like the same country that we grew up in. And those of us who are over the age of 60, definitely not. So let me go on and read a little bit more from Mr. Frederick Bastiat. He says, if the natural tendencies of mankind are so bad that it is not safe to permit people to be free, how is it that the tendencies of these organizers are always good? Good question. We see government overreach. We see them telling us more and more directives as to what we should do. Do not the legislators, says Bastiat, and their appointed agents also belong to the human race? Or do they believe that they themselves are made of a finer clay than the rest of mankind? End of that quote. And that's what we fought the revolution for, because King George was not very happy that those in the colonies had newspapers. They had too many newspapers, in fact. They wrote too much. They talked too much, he said. They didn't like it. There was a reason they fought the revolution. They loved this new land. They saw the liberty, the freedom in this faraway land where they could not easily be encroached upon. It was a further away place than the other places of the British rule. Another wonderful quote by Bastiat. Life, faculties, production, in other words, individuality, liberty, property, this is man. And in spite of the cunning of artful political leaders, these three gifts from God precede all human legislation and are superior to it. Individuality, liberty, and property. This is in our Constitution. This is the liberty of living in the United States of America. Things have happened since then. Owning property. Think about the story I just told you about the kulaks, the Ukrainians that tried to hold on to their culture and their land, what they had made and what they had earned. Think of the many of the slaves that came to the North. Frederick Douglass. I was reading about Frederick Douglass. He came to the North. He was a slave. He became a great orator. He was educated in the North. And he started a newspaper called the North Star, because that was the star that the runaway slaves followed to get to freedom. I read some of his writings, looked them up, Frederick Douglass. Unbelievable vocabulary and teaching. And here you could say today that our educational system that we pay for with our tax dollars is maybe not the same as what they had in those times, in lesser financial situations. What has happened to our nation? Frederick Douglass had the speech of an orator and a freedom fighter. Read our history, understand where we come from, and understand the value of property and property rights. My own father, being a first generation Ukrainian, he went to a small school, pretty much a one hall. I went to the same school and they demolished it some years after I went there. It was not much of a school. It had 6 rooms, 1 hallway, and no library, and a playground. We were a diverse group in the little town in southern New Jersey that I grew up in. My father was not rich. His parents, remember, had nothing. They worked, they were laborers. My father learned to farm. He rented other farmers' properties. And in 1940, he found out about a farm that was much coveted by the older farmers. An older farmer had lost the property because of the Depression on a property tax sale. It was up for sale, and my father found out about it. Someone who liked him told him where to be and how to get the money together and just be there at that moment and bring this amount of money, which he did. And by God's grace, my father bought a 165-acre farm, which he was then able to farm on his own property. And he agreed to farm so many people's other fields to pay for the down payment. He worked for that. Many of you have histories in your families of how hard your parents, your grandparents worked. Look at your own history, the history of America, the history of every land where we have come from as a great, integrated, homogenized, but individual liberties of each one. I grew up on that farm. I often wondered, what if he didn't get that farm? He gave people work that worked on the farm. He also worked another job, a desk job, which he hated because he didn't like being inside. And all of his brothers and sisters also were gainfully employed. This was the spirit of America, of my grandparents and their great courage, and all of your grandparents, your brothers, your sisters. We know that there are parts of history that we must atone for, and all parts of our own history, our own personal history, must atone for. And this light of the great white brotherhood is our saving grace. It is the light of the goddess of liberty, which I'm sure my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, saw. I remember my father said, my grandmother said she was told the streets were lined with gold, paved with gold. Remember, no education, no reading, no writing. I barely ever spoke to her because we couldn't communicate. I felt bad about that. But I learned something about her. She was a wonderful cook, and she worked very hard, and she always told my father to tell me in English that no matter how poor you are, you can keep your house clean. That's what she said. I remembered that. It stuck with me. Cleanliness and godliness and all of those things. The things that we get from the simple people of our families and the flame of liberty that we have through our heritage. And how will we protect that heritage? How will you stand for the flame of liberty in this crucial hour of America? I have wept personally over what I have seen on the streets of America. I cannot even watch the statue of George Washington spray painted with foul language and broken to the ground. Let me tell you a little story about George Washington. I'm going to read this to you because it's important, again, to know history. It's important to know what really happened and not what someone thinks happened. I'd suggest you not just Google things, that you find books and read them. A book called Washington's Crossing by David Hackett Fisher. Well, I'm fond of reading his history. Very, very intense, extensive histories. On page 29 of that book, he talks about on July 6, 1776, the Continental Congress sent George Washington one of the first copies of the Declaration of Independence and ordered him to have it proclaimed at the head of the army in the way you shall think it most proper. Washington was quick to obey. On July 9th, he ordered that the several brigades are to be drawn up this evening and their respective parades at 6 o'clock, when the Declaration of Congress shewing the grounds and reasons of this measure is to be read with an audible voice. Washington's aide, Colonel Samuel Blatchley Webb, wrote in his diary, "The Declaration was read at the head of each brigade." They read the Declaration of Independence. That was very popular then, and was received with 3 huzzas or hurrahs by the troops. Everyone seemed highly pleased that we were separated from a king who was endeavoring to enslave his once loyal subjects. God grant us success in this our new character. End of that quote. The book goes on to say that evening, a jubilant, now this is where it brings it into the present situation, a jubilant mob of troops and townsmen removed the royal arms from New York's public buildings. They pulled down a handsome equestrian statue of George III on New York's Bowling Green. They cut off his head, and they carried the body through the town. Among many spectators, fifes and drums all the way, beating the Rogues' March. George Washington was appalled. He issued an order approving zeal in the public cause, but reprimanded the entire army for want of order. Washington ordered that in future these things shall be avoided by the soldiery and left to be executed by proper authority. The soldiery were unrepentant, and when they discovered that the statue was made of lead, they broke it into pieces and they sent it to the women of Litchfield, Connecticut, to be melted into musket balls. A small fragment of the horse's tail survives in the collections of the New York Historical Society. There was little malice in these Republican rituals. Captain Alexander Graydon observed that even George III himself, had he been among us, he would have been in no great danger of personal injury, at least from the army. We were indeed beginning to grow angry with him, and were not displeased with Thomas Paine for calling him a royal brute. But we had not yet acquired the true taste for cutting throats. So Washington had his hands full. That was the making of the Ascended Master Godfrey, who came in his last embodiment as Godfrey Ray King, as a messenger of the Great White Brotherhood with his twin flame Lotus, who was embodied as Benjamin Franklin at the time. So you see, Washington as an Ascended Master now. Lotus, Benjamin Franklin, an Ascended Lady Master. Our beloved Jesus, our beloved Mother Mary, and all the others who may have made their ascension that we know not of for sure. In 1776, Americans were less interested in pulling down a monarchy than in raising up a new republic in Washington's leadership. And that was the making of that Ascended Master Godfrey. He became a major part of that process within the army. He had to take all types of people throughout these colonies and pull them together into one unit, into one brotherhood of God. And this is what we must remember in our own victory in the light. And let us now hear from the Goddess of Liberty one more time, and then I would like us to take out the affirmations from Afra. that are in your bulletin. I'd like us to bring into our hearts and our souls and our mind some of this history that I've tried to impart to you today. The Goddess of Liberty said in the same dictation, if the spirit of liberty is to be honored, it must be honored not only by the man of low degree who rejoices in the hope of his exaltation, but also by those older sheep of the Lord's flock, whose hoary heads of wisdom are crowned not in order to bring personal adulation, but to focalize spiritual offices of great responsibility. The time has come when we shall muster in all who make their calling and election sure on behalf of the brotherhood the determination to give their all to the cause of liberty. The world welters in turmoil. Confusion is apparent, yet we dwell not in the sense of this unrighteousness, for we hold up the crown of understanding and the spirit of liberty to the eyes of men. More precious than rubies and diamonds or the treasures of the world is the spirit of liberty. By this spirit, great nations have arisen, monumental scientific discoveries have been made, and prophetic revelations have been released. Another excerpt from this dictation. The Goddess of Liberty says, the sons of liberty will rally and the world will know the mounting passion of hearts who love freedom. These love freedom enough to hold her torch, this torch, high, to look around about them and to pick up the debris that the flame will gladly transmute. We have the violet flame. That is why we are here to use the violet flame, to clean up the debris of every jot and tittle of the law. Goddess of Liberty said, no service is too lowly for these, for they follow in the wake of angelic vows, offering eternal service to God. She asks, does a humble heart need assistance? They serve. Must a thankless task be done? They do. Shall a seemingly archaic matter require study? They apply their minds. Is organization needed? They organize. Whatever the exigency, they reach up to the abundance of God, magnetize it, and offer it in the service of the light. The gods of Baal and Moloch have their adherents today. As Antichrist, they have their servers. And we uphold liberty and universal purpose. This year of decision, sons of liberty, hearken and live, and let live, for the peaceful advancement of the golden rule order and all mankind. I am the Goddess of Liberty. I am free. I am free. I am the flame of liberty. I am free. I am free. I am the flame of liberty. I am free. I am free. I am the flame of liberty. Let us now turn to our affirmations from beloved Afra, which is in your bulletins. This comes from Ascended Master Afra, our brother of light, who is the ancient patron of the continent of Africa and the sponsor of the Black race. He comes again with a message of unity and brotherhood for his brethren everywhere. This beloved brother of light is pledged to solve the problems of divergent peoples, local wars, discord in religion, strife between Arab and Jew, between black and white, Christian and Muslim. And we need him today as never before. Affirmations for brotherhood together. I walk in the footsteps of Afra. I am a brother, a sister to all. I comfort, I console. I am true to myself and to my God. I bear the honor of God in my heart. I enter into mystical union with the Holy Spirit. I am one with the Prince of Peace. I shall walk in the Spirit from this day on, for this is the day of my victory. This is my hour and the power of light. I shall lead my people to the throne of glory. Receive me now, O God. Amen. O beloved, mighty I am presence and holy Christ self of each one gathered here, in the temple on the throne of liberty's flame. O beloved goddess of liberty, our beloved Saint Germain and Portia, beloved Godfrey and Lotus, beloved angels of the sacred fire of liberty, beloved Guru Ma and beloved Linello, we call for the blessing of our Holy Communion. We call for the blessing of this light that we have invoked this day upon these elements that we receive, that we may feel the flame, the threefold flame, the true flame of liberty in our hearts. May we be ensconced in this flame this day. May the light of Almighty God descend into our temples as we receive thee, O Lord. Amen.